The day after Daniel's funeral, I thought I'd finally run out of tears. But grief is strange. It doesn't end. It just shifts. Sometimes it turns into silence, sometimes into disbelief. The house felt too big, too clean, like he'd been carefully erased from every room. I couldn't sit there surrounded by his absence any longer, so I did what needed to be done. I dressed in black again, grabbed the folder with his documents, and drove to the bank. The air inside smelled of lemon polish and recycled air. Everything about it was too bright for someone whose world had gone dark. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennet," the banker said gently when I approached. Her name tag read, Cynthia. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I murmured, handing her the death certificate. "I need to close my husband's account and transfer the remaining funds to the joint one." She nodded, typing something into her computer. Her fingers hesitated halfway through. "Is there a problem?" I asked. Cynthia frowned at the screen. This can't be right. It says the account was recently changed." "Changed?" My pulse quickened. "Yes," she said carefully. "There were several large transfers over the last few months, into another personal account under the name," she looked up, "Rebecca Hayes." The name hit me like ice water. My sister. I shook my head slowly. There must be some mistake. Rebecca doesn't even live in this state. Cynthia turned the screen toward me. "These are verified transactions, Mrs. Bennet, all authorized by your husband." For a moment the room spun. My husband, the man I trusted more than anyone, had been transferring everything to her. I barely heard Cynthia asking if I was okay. My throat burned as I managed a nod. I just need copies of the transactions," I said quietly. She printed the papers, each line a blow. Thousands of dollars, regular transfers. The last one just a week before he died. I drove home in silence, the sound of rain tapping the windshield like a clock counting down to something terrible. Rebecca hadn't even come to the funeral. She'd called the day before, said she was too overwhelmed. I'd believed her. Now all I could think about was her voice the last time we spoke. Soft, sympathetic, and careful. Too careful. I parked in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel. The papers trembled in my hands. "Why, Rebecca?" I whispered. "Why would he give you everything?" But deep down, a colder question began to form. One I didn't want to ask. What if she hadn't just taken his money? What if she'd taken him too? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their names side by side on those transfer receipts. Daniel Bennet and Rebecca Hayes. My husband and my sister. I sat at the kitchen table, the papers spread out like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like thunder. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I needed answers. I called Rebecca. It rang 5 times before she picked up. "Grace?" Her voice was light, hesitant. "I was going to call you today. How are you holding up?" I swallowed hard. I went to the bank. A pause. Too long. "The bank?" she repeated. "Yes, to close Daniel's account." My voice tightened. "They said he'd been transferring everything to you." Silence. Then a shaky breath. "Grace, I can explain." "Then do it," I snapped. "Right now." Her tone shifted. "It wasn't like that. Daniel, he wanted me to help manage things. He said you'd been under so much stress." "Don't lie to me." My hand clenched around the phone. "You didn't even come to the funeral." "I couldn't," she said quickly. "I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Another pause. "Of you finding out." The words landed like a punch. "What did you do, Rebecca?" I whispered. "Grace, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask for the money. He insisted. He said he wanted to make things right before it was too late." I stared at the wall, the kitchen clock ticking too loudly. "Make things right? What does that even mean?" There was a long exhale on the other end. "You should come see me," she said finally. "It'll be easier to explain in person." "Explain what?" "Everything," she said softly. "But Grace, there are things you don't know about Daniel." My chest tightened. "Like what?" But she didn't answer. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, listening to the empty dial tone. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Daniel had been distant in those last months. Late nights, secret phone calls, a look in his eyes I couldn't name. I thought it was stress, maybe health problems, but now it felt like something else entirely. I looked at the transfers again, then at the photo of us on our wedding day, his hand resting gently on my shoulder, his smile easy, trusting. I didn't recognize that man anymore. I didn't recognize my sister either. As the sun rose behind the rain clouds, one thing became painfully clear. I wasn't going to find peace until I knew what really happened between them, and I wasn't afraid to find out. Rebecca lived 3 hours north, in a quiet suburb called Willow Creek. The drive felt longer than it should have. Gray skies, endless highway, and too much time to think. The whole way there, I kept replaying her voice. There are things you don't know about Daniel. By the time I reached her street, my pulse was a steady drumbeat. Her house looked exactly the same as the last time I'd visited. White shutters, trimmed hedges, a little too perfect, like a magazine photo. Except now, it felt like a stage set. I parked in front and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Then I got out. When she opened the door, she looked startled. Hair in a messy bun, oversized sweater, no makeup. The sight almost softened me. Almost. "Grace," she said quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I need answers," I said. She stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee, familiar and wrong all at once. I followed her into the living room. On the table sat a half-empty glass of red wine and a folder of papers. "Start talking," I said. She hesitated, then sat down and rubbed her temples. "Daniel came to me 6 months ago," she began. "He was different, nervous. He said he'd made a mistake with some investments and didn't want you to know until he fixed it." I frowned. He told me everything. Why would he hide something like that from me? Because he thought it would destroy you, she said softly. He was trying to protect you. By giving you our money? Her eyes flicked to the floor. He asked me to move it under my name so it couldn't be seized if the company collapsed. He said once things settled, he'd move it back. I shook my head. That doesn't make sense. Daniel wasn't in financial trouble. Rebecca reached for the folder on the table and slid it toward me. "Look for yourself." Inside were bank statements, emails, loan agreements. I scanned them quickly, my throat tightening. There were indeed transactions, debts, failed ventures, quiet withdrawals. Daniel had been hiding losses I'd never known about. But one document stopped me cold, a medical bill. The letterhead read, St. Francis Oncology Center. I looked up. Why would Daniel have cancer treatment bills? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Because he was sick, Grace. He didn't tell you. He told me he couldn't stand the idea of you watching him fade away. The room tilted. "You're lying." "I wish I were," she whispered. "He started treatments in secret, but they weren't working. He told me everything when it was already too late. He said he was moving the money so you'd have something if he didn't make it." I sank into the couch, numb. My husband, the man I'd buried a week ago, had hidden an illness from me. Rebecca reached out a hand. "He didn't want you to find out this way." I pulled back. "You should have told me." I promised him I wouldn't. Her words echoed in my head until they didn't sound like words anymore. Just noise and betrayal and grief all tangled together. I stood up, dizzy. "I need to go. Grace, please." But I was already walking toward the door, clutching the folder like a lifeline. Outside, the wind smelled like rain again. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. If what she said was true, Daniel hadn't betrayed me. He'd been trying to protect me. But then why did it still feel like I'd been left in the dark on purpose? And why did one detail in the paperwork bother me? The signature on the last transfer looked wrong, almost like it wasn't Daniel's at all. When I got home that night, the house felt heavier than before, like it knew more than I did. I spread Rebecca's folder across the kitchen table, my eyes scanning every page. The medical bills seemed real, the debts, maybe. But that last transfer, $50,000, signed just 2 days before Daniel died, stopped me cold. Daniel's signature had always been elegant, looping, with a small flourish on the D. This one was clumsy, slanted, off. I grabbed an old file from our desk drawer, a copy of our mortgage Daniel had signed last year. I laid them side by side. The difference was undeniable. The signature on the bank transfer was a fake. My stomach twisted. Had Rebecca forged it, or someone else? I picked up the phone and called Cynthia, the banker. Cynthia, it's Grace Bennett again. I have a question about one of the transfers. Of course, she said politely. Which one? The one made 2 days before my husband's death. Can you tell me if it was done in person or online? She hesitated. Just a moment. I could hear her typing. Then, it was authorized in person, Mrs. Bennett. In person? My voice rose. Are you sure? Yes. I remember that day. Mr. Bennett came in late afternoon with someone. With someone? I interrupted. Yes, a woman. Blonde, maybe mid-30s. My breath caught. Did she give a name? I don't recall, but I remember she signed as a witness. The handwriting was neat. Rebecca Hayes, I think. The room tilted. Thank you, Cynthia, I managed, my voice shaking. When I hung up, I felt the air leave my lungs. Rebecca had been there, 2 days before Daniel died, signing next to him. But if the signature wasn't his, then she'd been there to fake it. I paced the living room, heart racing. My grief was gone now, replaced by something colder, sharper. I needed proof. I drove to Daniel's company the next morning. His assistant, a kind woman named Meredith, looked surprised to see me. I'm so sorry for your loss, she said gently. Thank you, I replied. I need a favor. Could you check when Daniel last came into the office? She frowned. Of course. Let me look. She tapped at her computer. His last login to the building was 5 days before he passed. Not 2 days before. She shook her head. No, he was supposed to come back for a meeting but canceled. Said he wasn't feeling well. I felt the ground tilt beneath me again. He couldn't have been at the bank. He wasn't even well enough to leave home, which meant the man who signed those transfers wasn't Daniel, and the woman standing beside him wasn't innocent. That evening I called Rebecca again. She didn't answer. I left one message, calm, deliberate. Becca, we need to talk. I know about the forgery. If you don't tell me the truth, I will. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, staring at the door, waiting for her call. It came at dawn. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Grace, don't go to the police yet. There's something you don't understand. Then make me understand, I said. A pause. Then, quietly, Daniel wasn't the man you thought he was, and neither am I. The line went dead again, and for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't sure which of them I'd really lost. By sunrise, my mind was a storm. I grabbed my keys and drove north again. No plan, no fear, just fury guiding me back to Willow Creek. Rebecca's car was in the driveway. I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. She was in the kitchen, pale, eyes red-rimmed, clutching a mug of cold coffee. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. She just sighed. I was hoping you wouldn't come. I slammed the folder on the table. You forged his signature. You transferred his money. Tell me why. She didn't deny it. That terrified me more than anything. Instead, she walked to the window, staring out at the rain. You think I wanted his money? She said quietly. I didn't. I wanted to protect him. Protect him? I snapped. From what? Me? Her shoulders tensed. From himself. She turned to face me, tears in her eyes. Daniel wasn't dying of cancer, Grace. He was dying because he was being blackmailed. I froze. Blackmailed? By who? She took a shaky breath. Someone from his company. He'd made a mistake, an investment deal gone bad. He thought he could fix it, but they threatened to expose him. He told me everything one night when he showed up at my house shaking. He said if the truth came out, you'd lose everything too. I stared at her. So he just handed you our life savings? He asked me to hide it. Somewhere they couldn't trace. That's why the transfers were under my name. I didn't touch a cent. And the forgery? I demanded. Her voice cracked. He was too weak that day. He couldn't get out of bed. He begged me to finish it for him. Said the money needed to move fast. My anger faltered. Rebecca, if that's true, why didn't you tell me? Because he made me promise. He didn't want you tangled in his mess. She shook her head. tears streaming down her cheeks. I thought I was helping him, but then he died before I could move the money back, and I panicked. The room felt smaller, the air too thin. "Why didn't you come to the funeral?" I asked, softer now. She swallowed hard. "Because I couldn't look you in the eye knowing what I'd done." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain against the windows. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope, thick, sealed, Daniel's handwriting scrawled across the front. "For Grace, if I don't get the chance to tell her myself." My hands trembled as I took it. Rebecca wiped her eyes. "He left it with me in case things went wrong. I was supposed to give it to you when you were ready." I tore the envelope open. Inside was a handwritten letter. "My love, if you're reading this, it means I didn't fix what I needed to. I've made mistakes, bad ones, and I was too proud to admit them. I moved our money to Rebecca so no one could touch it if things fell apart. She's not your enemy, Grace. She's helping me protect you. Please forgive me for the lies. I wanted to leave you peace, not pain. Whatever you find after I'm gone, know this. I loved you more than anything I ever built. Daniel." I read it twice before I could breathe. The anger, the confusion, the betrayal, all of it tangled into something else. Sorrow. Rebecca watched me carefully. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I was trying to keep his promise." For the first time, I believed her. But something still didn't sit right. "Who was blackmailing him?" I asked. She shook her head. "He never said." I looked at the letter again and noticed faint smudges near the bottom where the ink had bled. It wasn't his usual handwriting, not entirely, like he'd been trembling or afraid. My heart pounded. Daniel had secrets, yes, but maybe Rebecca still wasn't telling me all of them. "Becca," I said slowly, "where's the money now?" Her eyes darted away. "Safe," she whispered. "Where?" She didn't answer, and in that silence I knew the truth. There was one last layer to this story, one that Daniel had taken to the grave, and Rebecca was still trying to hide. The storm had eased by morning, but my thoughts hadn't. I barely remembered the drive home from Rebecca's, only that the letter lay on the seat beside me, Daniel's words burning through the paper like a heartbeat. He'd written about mistakes, protection, love, but not once had he said the money was gone. And Rebecca's last look haunted me. She wasn't just hiding guilt. She was guarding something. By noon, I called Cynthia at the bank again. "I need to trace the final transfer," I said. "The one under my sister's name. Where did it end up?" She hesitated. "Mrs. Bennett, those accounts are confidential unless—" "I have a notarized letter from Daniel," I lied. "You can verify it later. Just tell me where the money went." There was a pause, then quiet typing. "That account was closed 2 weeks ago. The balance was moved again, to a trust fund." My breath caught. "Under whose name?" "Grace Bennett," she said softly. For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat closed around the truth. He had protected me. Rebecca hadn't stolen a thing. She'd finished what he started. I drove back to Willow Creek that afternoon. Rebecca opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been waiting. "You know," I said. She nodded. "He wanted it that way. The trust activates automatically after the transfer's cleared. He made me promise not to tell you until the paperwork was final." "Why didn't you just say that?" "Because I was scared you'd think I'd taken it," she said, her voice breaking. "And I almost didn't give you the letter. I thought maybe keeping his secret would protect his memory, but it was eating me alive. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift from my chest. I stepped closer and pulled her into a hug. "You should have trusted me," I whispered. "I should have," she said, trembling. We stayed like that for a while, 2 women bound by the same man and the same grief. Different kinds of love, both bruised but real. When I finally left, the sun was setting, turning the sky gold and violet. On the passenger seat sat Daniel's letter, edges soft from being read too many times. That night, I drove to the lake house, our favorite place. I lit a candle, poured 2 glasses of wine, and read his words again, this time aloud. "I wanted to leave you peace, not pain." The waves outside whispered against the dock, and for the first time since the funeral, I believed him. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd just trusted the wrong person to tell the story. And now, standing there in the quiet, I finally forgave them both. The money didn't matter. The truth did. I raised my glass toward the empty chair by the window. "You kept your promise, Daniel," I said softly, "and so will I." The candle flickered once, then burned steady, warm and alive, just like the love he'd left behind.